The notification sound from my phone pierced through the quiet Tuesday evening at 9:47 p.m. I was curled up on our living room couch in Millbrook, grading my son Connor's math homework while my husband Michael worked late again at TechFlow Solutions. The message was from Melissa Hammond, my brother-in-law Jake's wife, and the words on the screen made my blood run cold. Ashley, we need to talk. What you've been doing to my marriage is disgusting. I have proof of your inappropriate behavior with Jake, and if you don't stop, I'm telling Michael everything. Meet me at Riverside Park tomorrow at 2 p.m., or I'm posting about this online for everyone to see. I stared at the message, reading it 3 times before it fully registered. Inappropriate behavior with Jake? The accusation was so absurd it would have been laughable if it wasn't so potentially devastating. What Melissa didn't know was that I had something she clearly forgot about. Tucked away in my phone's voice memo app was a recording that would turn her entire narrative upside down. A recording of her practically begging me to pursue her own husband just 6 weeks earlier. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The story really begins 4 months ago, on a crisp October evening when Michael and I hosted what was supposed to be a simple family barbecue at our house in the Maple Ridge neighborhood. I had no idea that this innocent gathering would set in motion a chain of events that would test every relationship in our tight-knit family and force me to question everything I thought I knew about the people closest to us. I'm Ashley Chen Torres, 29 years old, and I've been part of the Torres family for 4 years now since marrying Michael. Before that, I was just Ashley Chen, a marketing coordinator at Creative Marketing Hub, who thought she had life figured out. Growing up as the daughter of Frank and Diana Chen, I learned early that family loyalty runs deep, but so does the expectation to maintain harmony at all costs. My parents immigrated from Taiwan when I was 2, and they instilled in me the values of respect, hard work, and keeping family matters private. These principles shaped who I became, but they also made me perhaps too trusting, too willing to give people the benefit of the doubt, even when red flags were waving right in front of my face. When I met Michael at a coffee shop in downtown Denver 3 years ago, I was immediately drawn to his warmth and his obvious devotion to his family. He talked about his younger brother Jake with such pride, describing him as charismatic and ambitious, someone who could sell ice to an Eskimo. Michael's mother Patricia had raised both boys as a single parent after their father left when Jake was just 8 years old, and the bond between the 3 of them was something I admired and wanted to be part of. Michael was steady and reliable, working as a software engineer with dreams of eventually starting his own tech company. He was the kind of man my parents approved of, someone who would provide stability and security. Our wedding was a beautiful blend of my Chinese heritage and his Mexican traditions, held at the Millbrook Community Center with both families celebrating late into the night. Jake served as Michael's best man, charming everyone with his toast about how Michael had finally found someone who could keep up with his terrible dad jokes. Even then, I noticed how Jake had a way of commanding attention, how conversations seemed to revolve around him wherever he went. But I saw it as confidence, as the natural charisma Michael had described. I had no reason to think it was anything more complicated than that. Jake Torres is 27, 3 years younger than Michael, but somehow always seemed like the older brother in their dynamic. Where Michael is methodical and cautious, Jake is impulsive and bold. He got into real estate right out of college, drawn by the potential for high earnings and the flexibility of being his own boss. For the first few years, it worked well for him. He had a natural talent for connecting with clients, for making them feel like he was personally invested in finding them their dream home. He drove a sleek black BMW, wore expensive suits, and always seemed to have exciting stories about big deals and satisfied customers. It was at one of Patricia's Sunday dinners, about 6 months after Michael and I got married, that Jake first brought Melissa around. She walked into Patricia's cozy house on Oak Street, like she was stepping onto a red carpet, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her outfit clearly chosen to make an impression. Melissa Hammond was 24 then, already building what she called her personal brand on social media. She had started an Instagram account focused on lifestyle content, posting carefully curated photos of her morning routines, her workout sessions, her beautifully plated meals. At the time, she had about 15,000 followers, but she talked about her goals like she was already a major influencer. I remember thinking she was beautiful, but perhaps a little too polished for a casual family dinner. Everything about her seemed calculated, from the way she complimented Patricia's cooking while mentioning her own strict dietary restrictions, to how she positioned herself for photos throughout the evening. But Jake was clearly smitten, and who was I to judge? Michael and I had our own way of being together that might seem odd to outsiders. I tried to be welcoming, asking her about her interests and her work, genuinely wanting to connect with someone who might become my sister-in-law. Melissa and Jake's relationship moved quickly. Within 6 months, they were living together in a trendy downtown loft that cost more than Michael and I paid for our mortgage. Jake insisted he could afford it, that his real estate commissions were covering the high rent easily. Melissa's social media following continued to grow, and she started landing small sponsorship deals with local businesses. She would post about her favorite restaurants, beauty products, workout gear, always with the hashtag Millbrook lifestyle. To outsiders, they looked like the perfect young couple living their best life. The first cracks in their facade began to show about a year after they moved in together. Michael started mentioning that Jake seemed stressed, that he was working longer hours and seemed more irritable during family gatherings. The real estate market had become more competitive, and Jake was struggling to close deals like he used to. But instead of cutting back on expenses, he and Melissa seemed to be spending more. Melissa's social media presence demanded a certain lifestyle, and maintaining that image apparently required constant investment in new clothes, trendy restaurants, and expensive experiences to photograph and share. It was around this time that I started noticing changes in how Melissa interacted with our family. During Sunday dinners, she would make subtle comments about our neighborhood, asking when Michael and I might consider upgrading to something more central like their loft. She would compliment my outfits, but always with a suggestion for how I could elevate my look. When I announced that Michael and I were trying for a baby, she immediately launched into advice about maintaining my figure during pregnancy and how important it would be to document the journey for social media, even though I had never expressed any interest in sharing my personal life online. Connor was born on a snowy February morning, and holding my son for the first time was the most overwhelming joy I had ever experienced. Michael cried when the nurse placed Connor in his arms, and even Patricia, who I had never seen show much emotion, had tears in her eyes. Jake and Melissa visited us in the hospital, bringing an elaborate bouquet of flowers and a gift basket filled with expensive baby items. Melissa immediately started taking photos, posting about her gorgeous new nephew, and how excited she was to be an aunt. But there was something performative about her enthusiasm that left me feeling uneasy. The first few months of Connor's life were a blur of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and the steep learning curve of new parenthood. Michael was incredibly supportive, taking on night feedings when he could, and never complaining about the chaos that had taken over our once orderly home. His family rallied around us as well, with Patricia stopping by several times a week to help with meals and laundry. Jake would visit when he could, and I could see genuine affection in his eyes when he held Connor. It was during these visits that I began to see a different side of my brother-in-law, a gentler and more thoughtful side that contrasted with his usual high-energy persona. Melissa's visits were less frequent and more complicated. She would arrive with her phone ready to capture content, taking dozens of photos of herself with Connor for her social media accounts. She seemed more interested in how cute the baby looked in pictures than in actually interacting with him. When Connor would cry or need a diaper change, she would quickly hand him back to me, making comments about how she wasn't ready for the messy parts of parenthood. Her posts about these visits always portrayed her as the doting aunt, but the reality felt much more calculated. When Connor was about 8 months old, Michael and I started trying for our second child. We were both eager to give Connor a sibling close in age, and we felt like we had found our rhythm as parents. Sophie was born the following spring, a beautiful little girl with Michael's dark eyes and my stubborn chin. If I thought Connor's birth had brought out complex feelings in Melissa, Sophie's arrival seemed to trigger something even more intense. By the time Sophie was 6 months old, it became clear that Jake and Melissa's relationship was under serious strain. Jake had always been good at putting on a confident front, but the stress was showing in ways he couldn't hide. He had lost weight, there were dark circles under his eyes, and his usual quick wit had been replaced by distracted responses and forced smiles. Melissa, meanwhile, had doubled down on her social media presence, posting constantly about their relationship and their lifestyle, as if the frequency of her posts could somehow make their problems disappear. It was during this period that Melissa started reaching out to me more frequently. At first, her calls and messages seemed innocent enough. She would ask for advice about dealing with family stress, or she would want to vent about Jake's work schedule. I tried to be supportive while maintaining appropriate boundaries, encouraging her to communicate directly with Jake about their issues rather than discussing them with me. But gradually her conversations began to take on a more troubling tone. She started making comments about how understanding I was, how easy I was to talk to compared to Jake. She would mention how she envied the stability that Michael and I had, how we seemed to have everything figured out. At the time, I interpreted these comments as the normal insecurities of someone whose relationship was going through a rough patch. I had no idea that she was laying the groundwork for something much more complicated and disturbing. The October barbecue that would change everything was supposed to be a celebration. Michael had just received a promotion at TechFlow Solutions, a significant step forward in his career that came with a substantial salary increase and the promise of even better opportunities ahead. I had recently returned to work part-time after Sophie's birth, finding a perfect balance that allowed me to pursue my career while still being present for my children. We felt like we were in a good place, finally hitting our stride as a family of 4. I spent the morning of the barbecue preparing food and decorating our backyard, excited to share our good news with the family. Michael had set up a playlist of his favorite music, and the kids were napping so they would be in good moods for the evening. Patricia arrived early to help with preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Preparations. Bringing her famous tres leches cake, and stories about her week volunteering at the community center. My parents came next, my mother immediately taking over the kitchen despite my protests, and my father settling into his favorite chair on our back patio with a beer and the latest news on his tablet. Jake and Melissa were the last to arrive, and I could tell immediately that something was off. Jake's usual enthusiastic greeting was subdued, and he seemed to be making an effort to appear more cheerful than he actually felt. Melissa, on the other hand, was almost aggressively upbeat, complimenting everything from my outfit to the decorations to the smell of the food on the grill. She was dressed impeccably as always, in a flowing sundress that photographed beautifully against our backyard setting, and she immediately began taking pictures for her social media accounts. The evening started pleasantly enough. Michael announced his promotion to cheers and congratulations from everyone, and Patricia made a toast about how proud she was of both her sons. Jake seemed genuinely happy for his brother, though I caught moments when his smile would falter, and he would stare off into the distance with a worried expression. Melissa recorded Jake's congratulatory speech on her phone, later posting it with captions about how supportive their family was and how excited they were for Michael's success. As the night wore on and the adults relaxed with drinks and conversation, I began to notice that Melissa was paying unusual attention to Jake's interactions with me. When he complimented the meal I had prepared, she would immediately jump in with her own praise, as if she was competing for his attention. When he offered to help me clear dishes or check on the children, she would suggest alternative ways he could help, steering him away from spending time alone with me. At the time, I thought she was being possessive in the way that couples sometimes are, perhaps feeling insecure about their relationship problems and wanting to keep Jake close. The turning point came when Connor, who had been playing quietly in the corner of the patio, fell and scraped his knee on the concrete. His wails immediately drew everyone's attention, and I hurried to comfort him and assess the damage. It was a minor scrape, nothing that required more than cleaning and a bandage, but Connor was upset and wanted his mommy. Jake, who was standing nearby, immediately offered to help, suggesting he could get the first aid kit from our bathroom while I held Connor. It was a perfectly innocent and helpful gesture, the kind of thing family members do for each other without thinking twice. But as Jake headed into the house, I noticed Melissa watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. There was something calculating in her eyes, as if she was filing away this moment for future reference. When Jake returned with the bandages and helped me clean Connor's scrape, making silly faces to distract my son from his tears, Melissa immediately positioned herself to take photos of the interaction, commenting loudly about what a great Uncle Jake was and how natural he looked with children. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and Michael was putting the children to bed, I found myself thinking about Melissa's behavior throughout the night. There had been something performative about her responses to every interaction between Jake and me, as if she was creating a narrative that only she could see. But I dismissed my concerns as overthinking, chalking up her behavior to the stress she and Jake were clearly under in their relationship. It was 3 days later that I received the first concerning phone call from Melissa. I was at work, trying to catch up on a marketing campaign for one of our bigger clients, when my phone rang with her contact information. She sounded distressed, explaining that she and Jake had gotten into a fight the night before and she needed someone to talk to. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her for coffee during my lunch break, thinking that maybe I could help them work through whatever issues they were having. The coffee shop Melissa chose was one of her favorites, a trendy place downtown that she frequently featured in her social media posts. When I arrived, she was already seated at a corner table, looking perfectly put together despite claims of being upset. She had ordered for both of us, choosing drinks that she said would photograph well if she decided to post about our meeting. This immediately struck me as odd, but I tried to focus on being supportive rather than judgmental. Melissa's version of the fight with Jake was vague and confusing. According to her, they had argued about money, about his work stress, about their future plans, but she couldn't seem to provide specific details about what had actually been said. Instead, she kept steering the conversation toward how frustrated she was with Jake's inability to communicate, how she felt like he didn't understand her needs, how she sometimes wondered if they were truly compatible. What made me most uncomfortable was how often she brought up Michael and me as examples of what a relationship should look like. She talked about how she envied our stability, our communication, our obvious happiness together. She made comments about how lucky I was to have a partner who was so attentive and reliable, and how she wished Jake could be more like Michael. At the time, I tried to redirect the conversation, explaining that every relationship has its challenges, and that comparing relationships rarely leads to anything productive. But then Melissa said something that should have been a massive red flag, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. She mentioned how much she had enjoyed watching Jake interact with Connor at the barbecue, how natural and caring he had seemed. She said it made her think about what kind of father he might be someday, but also made her realize how much she valued having him in our family's life. The way she phrased it was strange, as if she was testing my reaction to the idea of Jake being more involved in our family dynamics. I tried to keep the conversation brief and supportive, encouraging her to have an honest conversation with Jake about their concerns, and perhaps consider couples counseling if they were struggling to communicate effectively. But as I walked back to my office after lunch, I couldn't shake the feeling that there had been an agenda to our meeting that I hadn't fully understood. Melissa had seemed more interested in my reactions to her comments about Jake than in actually working through her relationship problems. Over the following weeks, these coffee meetings became a regular occurrence. Melissa would call or text, claiming she needed advice or just someone to listen, and I would meet her out of a sense of family obligation and genuine concern for her well-being. Each conversation followed a similar pattern: vague complaints about Jake, effusive praise for Michael and our relationship, and increasingly specific questions about my interactions with Jake and my opinions about him as a person. During this time, I also started noticing changes in Jake's behavior during family gatherings. He seemed more withdrawn than usual, often checking his phone or stepping outside to take calls. When he did engage in conversation, there was a forced quality to his cheerfulness that reminded me of someone trying very hard to appear normal. Melissa, meanwhile, seemed to be documenting everything more intensively than ever, taking photos and videos constantly, and posting them with captions about family bonds and support systems. It was during one of our coffee meetings in early November that Melissa crossed a line that should have ended our conversations immediately. We were discussing holiday plans and how families navigate the stress of the season, when she suddenly shifted the conversation in a direction that caught me completely off guard. She started talking about attraction and compatibility, about how sometimes people are drawn to individuals who represent what they wish their current partner could be. She began asking me direct questions about whether I had ever been attracted to someone other than Michael, whether I thought it was normal to have feelings for people who were off limits, whether I believed that emotional connections could be just as significant as physical ones. The questions were phrased as theoretical discussions, but there was an intensity to her focus that made me deeply uncomfortable. I tried to steer the conversation back to safer topics, but she kept pushing, becoming more specific in her scenarios and more pointed in her questions. Then she said something that I should have recognized as manipulation, though at the time I was too shocked to process it fully. She told me that she thought Jake had developed feelings for me, that she had noticed the way he looked at me during family gatherings, how he always seemed more animated and engaged when I was around. She said she wasn't angry about it because she understood why someone would be drawn to me, but she was concerned about what it might mean for their relationship and for our family dynamics. I was horrified by the suggestion and immediately shut down the conversation, making it clear that I had never noticed any inappropriate behavior from Jake, and that I was committed to maintaining appropriate boundaries with all family members. I told her that if she was genuinely concerned about Jake's feelings, she needed to address the issue with him directly rather than discussing it with me. But even as I said this, I couldn't help but feel like I was being manipulated in some way, though I couldn't quite identify how or why. It was that evening, after an uncomfortable and confusing coffee meeting, that I made a decision that would prove to be crucial weeks later. I started recording our conversations. I had been feeling increasingly uneasy about Melissa's questions and comments, and something told me I might need to protect myself if the situation escalated. Using the voice memo app on my phone, I began discreetly recording our meetings, telling myself it was just a precaution and that I would delete the files once whatever was happening between Jake and Melissa resolved itself. The recording that would later become so important was made during our meeting 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Melissa had called me that morning, sounding more distressed than usual, claiming that she and Jake had reached a crisis point in their relationship and she desperately needed to talk to someone who would understand. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at the same coffee shop where we had been having our previous conversations. This time, Melissa's agenda became crystal clear. She spent the first few minutes talking about how unhappy she had become in her relationship with Jake, how she felt like they had grown apart and no longer wanted the same things. But then she began talking about me in a way that made my skin crawl. She said she had been thinking about our conversations, about how easy it was to talk to me, how much she valued our connection. Then she said the words that I never could have anticipated. Words that I'm grateful I have recorded because no one would have believed them otherwise. She told me that she thought Jake and I would be perfect for each other, that she had been watching us interact and could see a natural compatibility that she and Jake had never shared. She said she had been thinking about this for weeks, and she believed that everyone would be happier if Jake and I could explore our connection while she stepped back from the relationship. I was so shocked by this suggestion that I initially thought I had misunderstood her meaning. But she continued, becoming more explicit in her proposal. She suggested that I could spend more time with Jake, perhaps meet him for coffee or lunch to see if there was genuine attraction between us. She said she would find ways to give us opportunities to be alone together, and that she wouldn't interfere if something developed between us. She even suggested that it might be better for everyone involved if their relationship ended so that Jake could be with someone who truly understood him. The most disturbing part of this conversation was how calculated it seemed. This wasn't a moment of emotional breakdown or impulsive confession. Melissa had clearly thought this through, developing what she believed was a rational plan that would solve her relationship problems while giving her some kind of perceived benefit. She spoke about it as if she was doing me a favor, offering me something valuable that I should be grateful to receive. I was horrified and confused by her proposal, making it immediately clear that I had no interest in pursuing any kind of relationship with Jake beyond normal family interactions. I told her that she needed to work out her relationship problems with Jake directly, and that involving me in whatever fantasy she had constructed was completely inappropriate. I left that meeting feeling disturbed and manipulated, but I had no idea that this conversation was actually the setup for something much more sinister. It was exactly 1 week later that everything changed. I received a text message from Jake asking if I could meet him for coffee because he needed to talk to someone about family matters. The message seemed innocent enough, and I assumed he wanted to discuss his relationship problems with Melissa, or perhaps ask for advice about holiday planning. I agreed to meet him, suggesting a coffee shop near my workplace where we could have a brief conversation during my lunch break. Jake looked exhausted when I arrived at the coffee shop. He had lost more weight, and there was a defeated quality to his posture that I had never seen before. He thanked me for meeting him and immediately launched into an explanation of why he had reached out. He told me that Melissa had been acting strangely for weeks, making cryptic comments about their relationship and suggesting that he should consider other options. He said he was confused and concerned about her mental state, and he wanted to know if she had said anything to me during our recent conversations that might help him understand what was happening. I found myself in an impossible position. I couldn't tell Jake about Melissa's disturbing proposal without potentially destroying their relationship and causing massive drama within our family. But I also couldn't lie to him when he was clearly struggling and looking for answers. I tried to be vague, mentioning that Melissa had seemed unhappy and might benefit from professional counseling, but avoiding the specific details of what she had suggested. Jake seemed frustrated by my evasive answers, and I could tell he knew I was holding something back. He pressed me for more information, asking if Melissa had said anything about their future together or about other people in their lives. The conversation was becoming increasingly uncomfortable, and I was preparing to end it when something happened that would later be used against me in the most twisted way possible. Jake's phone rang, and he glanced at the caller ID before declining the call. He made a comment about needing to deal with work stress on top of everything else, and I could see that he was genuinely overwhelmed by the combination of personal and professional problems. In a moment of family compassion, I reached across the table and briefly touched his hand, telling him that everything would work out and that he should focus on taking care of himself during this difficult time. It was a gesture I would have made to any family member who was struggling, a simple expression of support and care that lasted no more than a few seconds. I thought nothing of it at the time, seeing it as the kind of comfort that family members naturally offer each other during tough periods. But unbeknownst to me, this innocent moment was being documented by someone who would later use it to support a completely fabricated narrative about our relationship. As I walked back to my office after the coffee meeting, I had no idea that my life was about to be turned upside down by accusations that would test every relationship in our family and force me to confront the reality that someone I had tried to help was actually orchestrating a campaign designed to destroy my reputation and my marriage. The recording on my phone would prove to be my salvation, but first I would have to endure weeks of suspicion, manipulation, and betrayal that would change how I viewed trust and family loyalty forever. The next few days passed normally, with the usual routines of work and childcare filling my time. Michael was busy with his new responsibilities at TechFlow Solutions, often working late to prove himself in his promoted position. Connor was thriving in his first year of elementary school, coming home each day with stories about his friends and new things he had learned. Sophie was developing her own little personality, babbling constantly, and taking her first tentative steps around our living room. It was during this period of normal family life that I started noticing changes in how Melissa interacted with me at family gatherings. There was a new intensity to her attention, as if she was studying my every move and reaction. She would position herself where she could observe my interactions with Jake, and I began to feel like I was being watched and evaluated in ways that made me increasingly uncomfortable. The final family gathering before everything exploded was Patricia's birthday dinner the Sunday before Thanksgiving. The entire family came together to celebrate, with my parents joining the Torres family for a meal that Patricia had insisted on cooking herself despite our offers to help. The evening should have been joyful, a celebration of family bonds and gratitude for the year we had shared. But I could feel tension underlying the festivities, particularly between Jake and Melissa. They arrived separately, with Jake explaining that he'd been showing a house and running late. Melissa had been there for over an hour, helping Patricia with preparations and taking photos for her social media accounts. When Jake finally arrived, their interaction was strained and formal, lacking the easy affection that had characterized their relationship in earlier years. Throughout the evening, I made a conscious effort to maintain normal, appropriate interactions with all family members, while being particularly mindful of my behavior around Jake. I had become hyper-aware of Melissa's observation and wanted to ensure that nothing I did could be misinterpreted or used to support whatever narrative she seemed to be constructing in her mind. But despite my caution, I couldn't control how others behaved or how their actions might be perceived by someone who was actively looking for evidence to support predetermined conclusions. When Jake complimented the dessert I had brought, when he helped me carry dishes to the kitchen, when he played with Connor and Sophie in the living room, I could see Melissa watching and mentally cataloging each interaction. It was after this dinner, as Michael and I were driving home with our sleepy children in the back seat, that I finally decided to tell my husband about the concerning conversations I had been having with Melissa. I had been hoping the situation would resolve itself, but it was clear that something more serious was developing that could affect our entire family. I explained to Michael about Melissa's strange questions, her inappropriate suggestions about Jake and me, and my growing concern about her mental state. Michael listened with increasing alarm, particularly when I described her proposal that Jake and I should explore a relationship together. He was as shocked and disturbed as I had been, and we spent the rest of the drive home discussing how to handle this delicate family situation. Michael's first instinct was to confront Jake directly, but I convinced him that we needed to be more strategic in our approach. If Melissa was having some kind of mental health crisis, a direct confrontation might make the situation worse for everyone involved. We decided that Michael would have a careful conversation with Jake to gauge his awareness of Melissa's behavior, while I would distance myself from her requests for coffee meetings and private conversations. Looking back, I realized that this decision to handle the situation delicately, while well-intentioned, may have actually given Melissa more time to develop and implement whatever plan she was constructing. We were trying to protect family relationships and avoid unnecessary drama, but we failed to recognize that we were dealing with someone who was willing to fabricate serious accusations to achieve her goals. The Tuesday evening when I received Melissa's accusatory message was exactly 1 week after Patricia's birthday dinner. Michael was working late again, and I was enjoying a rare quiet moment at home with both children asleep and no immediate demands on my attention. The harsh buzz of my phone notification shattered that peace and launched me into a nightmare I never could have anticipated. As I read and reread her message threatening to expose my supposed inappropriate behavior with Jake, I felt a mixture of disbelief, anger, and fear. This was exactly the kind of situation I had been trying to avoid by keeping my distance from her in recent weeks. But somehow, my efforts to maintain appropriate boundaries had been twisted into evidence of guilt in her mind. The most terrifying part of her message was the threat to make her accusations public through social media. Melissa had built a substantial following in our local community, and she had demonstrated her willingness to share personal details of her life online. If she decided to post false accusations about me, the damage to my reputation could be immediate and irreversible, affecting not just me but potentially Michael's career and our children's standing in our close-knit community. But as I sat there staring at her message, I remembered something that gave me a glimmer of hope in this impossible situation. The recording on my phone of her begging me to pursue her husband, her detailed explanation of why she thought Jake and I should be together, her calculated plan to give us opportunities to develop a relationship. The very evidence that would prove not only my innocence, but also the true nature of her manipulative and disturbing behavior. Tomorrow I would have to face her accusations, but tonight I would prepare my defense. The truth had a way of emerging, even when it was buried under layers of lies and manipulation. And the truth was all captured in her own words, recorded on my phone, ready to turn her entire fabricated story on its head. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood as I prepared for what I knew would be one of the most difficult conversations of my life. I had barely slept, spending most of the night replaying every interaction I'd had with Jake over the past few months, searching for anything that could have been misinterpreted or twisted to support Melissa's accusations. Michael had left early for an important presentation at TechFlow Solutions, kissing me goodbye and whispering words of encouragement about handling the situation with Melissa. He had offered to call in sick and come with me, but we both agreed that his presence might escalate the confrontation rather than resolve it. I dropped Connor off at Pine Valley Elementary, watching as he ran toward his classroom with his backpack bouncing, completely oblivious to the storm brewing in his family's life. Sophie was spending the day with my mother, who had agreed to babysit without asking too many questions about why I needed help on a Wednesday afternoon. Deanna Chen had raised me to handle my own problems, but she could sense the stress in my voice and offered her support without prying into details I wasn't ready to share. Riverside Park in November was nearly deserted, the playground equipment damp from morning rain, and the walking paths scattered with fallen leaves that crunched under my feet as I made my way to the covered pavilion where Melissa had suggested we meet. I arrived 15 minutes early, using the time to compose myself and review the key points I wanted to make. My phone felt heavy in my jacket pocket, the weight of the recorded conversation serving as both comfort and reminder of how completely this situation had spiraled beyond anything I could have imagined. Melissa arrived exactly on time, walking across the park, in designer boots that seemed impractical for the wet grass, but perfectly suited for the social media photos she was undoubtedly planning to take. She looked impeccable as always, her blonde hair styled in loose waves despite the humidity, her makeup flawless, her expression a carefully constructed mask of righteous indignation mixed with wounded vulnerability. She was carrying a large tote bag and had her phone already in her hand, and I realized with growing dread that she was treating this confrontation as content for her online presence. "Ashley," she said as she approached the pavilion, her voice carrying a tone of disappointed authority that immediately put me on edge. "I'm glad you decided to come. I wasn't sure if you would have the courage to face what you've done." I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm and rational despite the absurdity of her accusation. "Melissa, I honestly have no idea what you think I've done. Your message last night was completely confusing to me. Can you please explain what this is about?" She set her tote bag on the picnic table between us and pulled out what appeared to be a folder filled with printed papers. "Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you don't know exactly what this is about. I have evidence, Ashley. Photographs, screenshots of messages, documentation of your inappropriate behavior with my husband." My heart began racing as she opened the folder and spread several printed photos across the table. They were pictures from various family gatherings over the past few months, but they had been cropped and selected to create a narrative that bore no resemblance to the innocent interactions they actually depicted. There was the photo of Jake helping me with Connor's scraped knee at our barbecue, cropped to focus on our proximity and his gentle expression as he worked with the bandage. Another showed us talking at Patricia's birthday dinner, the angle making it appear intimate despite the fact that we had been discussing his work stress in a room full of family members. Most disturbing was a photo that had clearly been taken without my knowledge during my coffee meeting with Jake the previous week. It showed the moment when I had briefly touched his hand in a gesture of family support, but from the angle it was captured, it looked deliberately romantic and secretive. The timestamp on the photo revealed that someone had been watching us, waiting for a moment that could be misinterpreted and documented. "These photos prove nothing except normal family interactions," I said, though I could feel my voice shaking slightly as I realized how thoroughly I had been surveilled and manipulated. "Jake is my brother-in-law, Melissa. Of course we interact at family gatherings. Of course I would offer support when he's going through a difficult time." Melissa laughed, a sound devoid of any genuine humor. "Normal family interactions don't require secret coffee meetings, Ashley. Normal family interactions don't involve touching someone else's husband when you think no one is watching. Normal family interactions don't include the kind of intimate conversations you've been having with Jake for weeks." I stared at her in amazement, trying to process the complete reversal of reality she was presenting. "Melissa, you were the one who encouraged me to spend time with Jake. You literally told me that you thought we would be perfect together. You suggested that I should explore a relationship with him while you stepped back from your marriage." Her expression shifted to one of shocked innocence, her eyes widening as if my words were the most outrageous thing she had ever heard. "I never said any such thing. Ashley, I think you may be having some kind of breakdown. The idea that I would encourage my own husband to have an affair is absolutely insane." The gaslighting was so complete and delivered with such convincing sincerity that for a moment I questioned my own memory of our conversations. But then I remembered the recording on my phone, the clear documentation of her exact words, and I felt a surge of confidence that this nightmare had an end. Actually, Melissa, I have proof of exactly what you said. I recorded our conversation 2 weeks ago when you made those suggestions about Jake and me. Would you like me to play it for you? The change in her demeanor was instantaneous and dramatic. The mask of wounded innocence disappeared, replaced by a cold calculation that I had never seen from her before. Her perfectly manicured hand moved to her phone, and I realized she was preparing to record our current conversation, probably planning to edit my words to support whatever narrative she intended to create. If you have some kind of recording, it's probably doctored or taken out of context, she said. But there was uncertainty in her voice now. People can manipulate audio files to say anything they want. It wouldn't prove anything except that you're desperate enough to fabricate evidence. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app, finding the file from our November meeting. Let's let your own words speak for themselves, shall we? As I pressed play, Melissa's voice filled the quiet pavilion, crystal clear and unmistakably hers. I think Jake and you would be perfect for each other. I've been watching you interact, and I can see a natural compatibility that Jake and I have never shared. I've been thinking about this for weeks, and I believe everyone would be happier if Jake and you could explore your connection while I step back from the relationship. The recording continued for several more minutes, capturing her detailed explanation of how she envisioned facilitating a relationship between Jake and me, her suggestions for creating opportunities for us to be alone together, and her reassurances that she wouldn't interfere if something developed between us. Her voice on the recording was calm and calculated, leaving no room for misinterpretation about her intentions or mental state at the time. Melissa's face had gone pale as she listened to her own words, but as the recording ended, she quickly regrouped and launched into a new strategy. That conversation was taken completely out of context. I was having a mental health crisis that day, and you took advantage of my vulnerable state to manipulate me into saying things I didn't mean. Any reasonable person would have recognized that I wasn't thinking clearly and would have tried to help me rather than recording me for their own protection. The victim blaming was breathtaking in its audacity, but I could see that she was scrambling now, trying to find a way to explain away evidence that completely contradicted her accusations against me. Melissa, if you were having a mental health crisis, then you need professional help, not revenge fantasies against family members. Nothing you're saying makes any sense. She stood up abruptly, gathering her photos and folder with sharp, angry movements. You think you're so smart, don't you? You think because you have some recording that you can just dismiss what I know about your behavior with Jake. But I have more evidence than just these photos, Ashley. I have witnesses. I have documentation of your pattern of inappropriate behavior that goes back months. My stomach dropped as I realized that this confrontation was not the end of her campaign against me, but possibly just the beginning. What witnesses? What documentation? Melissa, you're making things up because you know your accusations are false. Patricia saw how you were acting at her birthday dinner. She mentioned to me how concerned she was about the way you were paying attention to Jake, how you seemed to be competing with me for his affection. And my friend Sarah was at the coffee shop when you met with Jake last week. She saw how intimate you two looked, how you were touching him and leaning in close like you were sharing secrets. Each lie built on the previous one, creating a web of false testimony that could be difficult to disprove without forcing family members to choose sides in a conflict they didn't understand. I realized that Melissa had been planning this campaign for weeks, possibly months, carefully positioning herself to have explanations for any evidence that might contradict her story. You're lying about Patricia, and you know it, I said, though I felt a chill of fear about how convincing her story might sound to people who hadn't heard our recorded conversation. Patricia would never say anything like that about me, and she certainly wouldn't discuss private family matters with you behind my back. Melissa smiled, a cold expression that transformed her beautiful features into something almost predatory. People see what they want to see, Ashley. And what they're going to see is a pattern of behavior from you that shows you've been pursuing a married man while pretending to be a supportive family member. Your recording might confuse things temporarily, but it won't change the fundamental truth that everyone can observe with their own eyes. She slung her tote bag over her shoulder and pulled out her phone, opening what appeared to be her Instagram account. I'm giving you one last chance to admit what you've been doing and apologize publicly for your behavior. If you don't, I'm going to share the truth about your actions with our community. My followers trust me to be honest about my life, and they deserve to know when someone they've welcomed into their circle has been betraying that trust. The threat was clear and devastating. Melissa had cultivated an image as a trustworthy lifestyle influencer, someone who shared authentic moments from her life with transparency and vulnerability. If she posted accusations against me, complete with the manipulated photos and false witness accounts, the damage to my reputation would be immediate and potentially irreversible. People in our community who knew me only casually would likely believe her story, especially if it was presented with the polish and conviction she brought to all her social media content. Melissa, if you post false accusations about me, you'll be committing defamation. I have proof that your story is fabricated, and I won't hesitate to take legal action to protect myself and my family. She laughed again, the sound echoing off the pavilion walls. Legal action takes time, Ashley. Reputation damage happens instantly. By the time you could prove anything in court, everyone in Millbrook will know exactly what kind of person you really are. Your husband's career, your children's social standing, your family's reputation in this community, all of it will be destroyed because you couldn't keep your hands off someone else's husband. With that final threat, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the empty pavilion, with my phone still clutched in my hand and my mind racing through the implications of what had just occurred. This was no longer a simple family disagreement that could be resolved through honest conversation and mutual understanding. This was a calculated attack on my character and my family's well-being, orchestrated by someone who was willing to destroy multiple lives to achieve whatever twisted goals she had set for herself. I sat heavily on the damp picnic table bench, trying to process the complete reversal of reality I had just witnessed. The woman who had begged me to pursue her husband was now threatening to destroy my life for supposedly doing exactly what she had encouraged. The family member I had tried to support through her relationship difficulties was now positioning herself as the victim of my imaginary manipulations. The person who had seemed vulnerable and confused just weeks ago had revealed herself to be calculating and vindictive in ways I never could have anticipated. My phone buzzed with a text message, and my heart lurched as I saw Jake's name on the screen. "Can we talk? Melissa told me about your conversation at the park. I'm confused about what's happening and I need to understand." I stared at the message, realizing that Melissa had wasted no time in beginning the next phase of her campaign. Whatever story she had told Jake about our confrontation would undoubtedly be designed to support her narrative while making me appear guilty and manipulative. The careful web of lies she had constructed was already spreading through our family, and I would now have to defend myself against accusations that grew more elaborate with each telling. I drove home slowly, using the time to think through my options and prepare for the conversations that were inevitably coming. Michael would need to know everything that had happened at the park, including the escalation of Melissa's threats and her plan to make her accusations public. Patricia would need to be warned about the lies Melissa was telling about her supposed concerns regarding my behavior. Most importantly, I would need to document everything I could remember about my interactions with Melissa over the past few months, creating a timeline that could help demonstrate her pattern of manipulation and deception. When I arrived home, I found my mother's car still in the driveway and Diana Chen sitting in my living room with Sophie on her lap, both of them reading a picture book together. My mother looked up as I entered, and I could see concern in her eyes as she studied my expression. "How did your meeting go?" she asked in Mandarin, a habit she fell into when she was worried and wanted to speak more intimately with me. I responded in English, not wanting to exclude Sophie from our conversation even though she was too young to understand the complexities of what was happening. It was difficult. There are some family issues that are going to require careful handling over the next few weeks. My mother nodded, understanding that I couldn't discuss details in front of my daughter but recognizing the strain in my voice. Diana Chen had navigated her own share of complicated relationships during her years in America, and she had taught me the importance of maintaining dignity while protecting family interests. "Your father and I are here to help however we can. Sometimes these situations resolve themselves when people have time to think clearly." I hoped she was right, but as my phone continued to buzz with messages throughout the afternoon, I began to realize that this situation was likely to get much worse before it got better. Jake sent 3 more texts asking to meet, each one more urgent than the last. Patricia called and left a voicemail saying she wanted to discuss some concerning information she had received. Even my friend Rachel Kim sent a message asking if everything was okay because she had seen some weird social media activity that mentioned our family. By the time Michael arrived home from work, I had received a total of 15 messages from various family members and friends, all asking questions or expressing concern about different versions of whatever story Melissa was spreading. The web of confusion and misinformation was expanding rapidly, and I could see how easily the truth could be buried under layers of conflicting accounts and manufactured evidence. Michael found me in our kitchen, sitting at the counter with my phone and a notebook, trying to create a timeline of events that could help us navigate the storm that was building around our family. He took one look at my face and immediately came to wrap his arms around me, holding me close without asking any questions until I was ready to explain what had happened. "She's not going to stop," I said finally, my voice muffled against his chest. "This isn't about jealousy or misunderstanding. She has a plan, and she's executing it systematically. She's already started telling people her version of events, and she's threatening to make it public if I don't confess to things I never did." Michael pulled back to look at me, his expression hardening as he processed the implications of what I was telling him. "Then we fight back. We don't let her destroy our family with lies. We have the recording, we have the truth, and we have each other. That has to be enough." I wanted to believe him, but as my phone buzzed again with another message from a concerned friend, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were up against something bigger and more dangerous than either of us had realized. Melissa wasn't just one troubled woman making false accusations. She was someone with social media influence, community connections, and apparently no moral boundaries when it came to protecting whatever version of reality she had decided to create. The evening brought a phone call that changed everything. Patricia called just as we were sitting down to dinner with the children, her voice tight with emotion and confusion. "Ashley, honey, I need to ask you about something that Melissa told me today. She said there were some concerns about your interactions with Jake, and she seemed to think I had noticed something inappropriate at my birthday dinner." My stomach clenched as I realized that Melissa was already implementing her plan to use Patricia as an unwitting witness to support her fabricated story. "Patricia, I promise you that there has never been anything inappropriate between Jake and me. Whatever Melissa told you, it's not true. We have proof that she's been making up stories for her own reasons." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear Patricia's confusion and distress in her breathing. "I don't understand what's happening to this family." Melissa seemed so upset, and she said she had photos and witnesses. "But Ashley, I've watched you with Jake for 4 years, and I've never seen anything that concerned me. You've always been respectful and appropriate." Relief flooded through me as I realized that Patricia's natural instincts were protecting her from Melissa's manipulation. "Patricia, that's because nothing inappropriate has ever happened. Melissa has been having some kind of personal crisis, and for reasons I don't understand, she's decided to target me with false accusations. We're going to work through this as a family, but I wanted you to know that whatever she's telling people, it's not based in reality." After I hung up, Michael and I spent the evening developing a strategy for handling the expanding crisis. We decided that honesty and transparency would be our best defense, even if it meant having difficult conversations with every family member and friend who had received conflicting information. We would share the recording with anyone who needed to hear it, and we would document every interaction we had with Melissa moving forward. But as we prepared for bed that night, I couldn't escape the feeling that we were still underestimating the scope of what we were dealing with. Melissa had demonstrated a level of planning and manipulation that suggested this wasn't an impulsive reaction to relationship problems. This felt like something she had been building toward for months, and I had no idea what other surprises she might have prepared for us. The next morning brought confirmation of my worst fears. I woke up to find that Melissa had posted a long, emotional message on her Instagram account, complete with carefully selected photos and a narrative that painted her as the victim of a devastating betrayal by someone she had trusted as family. The post was masterfully crafted, balancing enough vague details to be believable with enough emotional content to generate sympathy and outrage from her followers. She had positioned herself as the heartbroken wife who had discovered her husband's emotional affair with his own sister-in-law, someone who had taken advantage of her trust and friendship to pursue an inappropriate relationship. The photos she included were the same ones she had shown me at the park, but presented with captions that completely misrepresented their context and meaning. Her writing was compelling and sympathetic, designed to generate maximum emotional impact while avoiding specific enough details that could be easily disproven. Within hours, the post had hundreds of comments from followers expressing support for Melissa and condemnation for the unnamed family member who had betrayed her trust. Several people who knew our family personally had already begun speculating in the comments about who might be involved, and I could see that it would only be a matter of time before my name was explicitly connected to her accusations. My phone was ringing constantly with calls from friends and acquaintances who had seen the post and were trying to piece together what was happening. Each conversation required me to explain a complicated situation that sounded unbelievable even to people who knew me well. The recording helped convince most people of my innocence, but I could see the exhaustion and stress beginning to take its toll on everyone involved. The most heartbreaking call came from Connor's teacher at Pine Valley Elementary. She gently informed me that there had been some concerning social media activity involving our family that other parents had brought to her attention. While she made it clear that she didn't believe the accusations, she wanted to give me a heads up that there might be increased scrutiny and gossip affecting Connor's classroom environment. The realization that Melissa's lies were now potentially affecting my 6-year-old son's school experience filled me with a rage I had never experienced before. This was no longer just about adult relationships and family drama. This was about protecting my children from the consequences of one person's willingness to destroy innocent lives for her own twisted purposes. It was that afternoon, as I sat in my car outside Sophie's daycare trying to compose myself before going inside to face potentially judgmental looks from other parents, that I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being defensive. I was done trying to handle this situation quietly and diplomatically. Melissa had escalated this conflict to a public level, and she had involved my children in her campaign of destruction. If she wanted a war, I would give her one. But I would fight with the truth, and I would make sure that everyone in our community understood exactly who they were really dealing with when they chose to support her narrative over reality. The recording on my phone was just the beginning of what I could prove about her manipulation and lies. That evening, I called Rachel Kim and asked her to meet me for coffee the next morning. As a lawyer specializing in defamation cases, Rachel would be able to help me understand my legal options and develop a strategy for protecting my family while exposing Melissa's deception. The time for quiet family diplomacy was over. The war for truth was about to begin. Rachel Kim arrived at the downtown coffee shop 20 minutes early, her briefcase already open on the table, and legal pads spread around her like she was preparing for a major trial. I had known Rachel since college, where we had been roommates and study partners through countless late nights and stressful exams. She had always been the more organized and methodical of us, qualities that had served her well in building a successful legal practice, specializing in defamation and social media disputes. When I called her the previous evening, barely holding back tears as I explained what was happening, she had immediately cleared her morning schedule and promised to help me navigate this nightmare. "Ashley," she said, standing to embrace me as I approached the table, "I've been doing some preliminary research since we talked last night, and I think we need to approach this situation much more aggressively than you might be comfortable with." Melissa's social media post has already been shared over 200 times, and the engagement is growing exponentially. This isn't just local gossip anymore. This is viral character assassination. I slumped into the chair across from her, feeling the weight of the situation settling more heavily on my shoulders. "Rachel, I just want my life back. I want my children to be able to go to school without whispers following them. I want Michael's career to be safe from this madness. I don't care about winning some public relations battle with Melissa." Rachel opened her laptop and turned it toward me, showing Melissa's Instagram post and the rapidly growing comment section. "Ashley, look at this objectively. This woman has created a narrative that positions you as a home-wrecking manipulator who targeted your own family. She's posted photos that appear to support her story, and she's generating sympathy from thousands of people who now see you as the villain in her tragic tale. You can't just ignore this and hope it goes away." I scrolled through the comments, each one feeling like a physical blow. Strangers were calling me terrible names, making assumptions about my character based entirely on Melissa's carefully crafted story. Several people had shared the post to other local social media groups, spreading the story throughout our community and beyond. Some commenters were already speculating about my identity, and I could see that it would be only a matter of hours before my name was definitively connected to the accusations. "What are my legal options?" I asked, closing the laptop because I couldn't bear to read any more of the vitriol being directed at me by people who had never met me. Rachel pulled out a thick folder and began laying out documents. Defamation law in Colorado is complex, but we have several strong angles here. First, the recording you made proves that her core narrative is false. She can't claim you seduced her husband when she's on record encouraging you to do exactly that. Second, the manipulation of photographs to create false impressions of intimacy could constitute intentional infliction of emotional distress. Third, if her false statements cause damage to your professional reputation or Michael's career, we can pursue economic damages. She handed me a legal document that looked intimidating in its formal language and precise formatting. "I've prepared a cease and desist letter that demands she immediately retract her false statements and remove all defamatory content from her social media accounts. We'll have it delivered by certified mail today, which creates a legal record that she's been formally notified that her statements are false and damaging." I read through the letter, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety about escalating the situation to this level. Rachel, what if this just makes her angrier? What if she decides to post even worse things about me in retaliation? Then we document everything and use it as evidence of her malicious intent, Rachel replied firmly. Ashley, you need to understand that this woman has already declared war on your reputation and your family. Being polite and hoping she comes to her senses isn't going to protect you. You need to fight back with every legal tool available. Rachel opened another folder and pulled out what appeared to be social media screenshots and printed articles. I spent most of last night researching Melissa's online presence and her history in this community. What I found is very concerning and suggests that this pattern of behavior isn't new for her. My attention sharpened as Rachel spread the documents across the table. "What do you mean, pattern of behavior?" 3 years ago, Melissa was involved in a similar situation with a woman named Jennifer Walsh, who used to own a boutique fitness studio here in Millbrook. Melissa posted accusations that Jennifer was having an affair with one of her clients, a married man whose wife was also a member of the studio. The accusations were detailed and convincing, complete with photos and witness accounts that seemed to support her story. Rachel handed me printed screenshots of old social media posts that showed Melissa making passionate pleas for community support against what she called Jennifer's predatory behavior toward married men. The posts had generated enormous engagement, with hundreds of supportive comments and shares throughout the local community. "What happened to Jennifer?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. "Her business was destroyed within 2 weeks. Parents pulled their children from her youth fitness programs, couples canceled their memberships, and several corporate clients terminated their contracts. Jennifer was forced to close the studio and ultimately moved out of state to escape the ongoing harassment and gossip." I stared at the documents, feeling sick as I realized the scope of what Melissa was capable of accomplishing. Was there any truth to the accusations? Rachel shook her head grimly. Jennifer hired a private investigator who discovered that the supposed affair never happened. The married man Melissa accused her of seducing had never even spoken to Jennifer beyond basic customer service interactions at the studio. The quote, witness accounts came from people who later admitted they had never actually seen anything inappropriate but had been convinced by Melissa's emotional appeals to support her story. Did Jennifer sue her? She tried, but by the time she could mount a legal response, Melissa had quietly deleted most of her posts and claimed that she had been acting on information provided by others who turned out to be mistaken. Without clear evidence of malicious intent, and with Jennifer already having left the state, the case never went anywhere. The implications were terrifying. Melissa had successfully destroyed someone's life and livelihood, using the same tactics she was now employing against me. She had refined her methods, learned how to generate maximum damage while covering her tracks legally, and she had apparently faced no consequences for her previous campaign of destruction. Rachel, if she's done this before, doesn't that prove she's likely doing it again? Can't we use Jennifer's case to show a pattern of false accusations? Potentially, yes, but first we need to locate Jennifer and convince her to testify about what happened to her. That's going to take time we may not have. In the meantime, we need to focus on protecting you and gathering evidence about Melissa's current campaign. Rachel opened her briefcase and pulled out what appeared to be a digital recorder and a small notebook. Starting today, I want you to document every interaction you have with anyone in your family or community about this situation. Record phone calls when legally possible, save all text messages and emails, and write down details of every conversation immediately after it happens. We're going to build an evidence file that demonstrates the scope of damage Melissa is causing and her intent to harm you. She handed me a business card for someone I didn't recognize. This is Marcus Torres, a private investigator who specializes in social media fraud and online harassment cases. He's going to help us gather information about Melissa's online activities, her connections with the people she's claiming as witnesses, and any other evidence that might support our case. The idea of hiring a private investigator felt like crossing into territory I never imagined I would need to navigate, but as I looked at the evidence of Melissa's previous victim, I realized that this situation required resources and expertise far beyond what Michael and I could manage on our own. "What about Jake?" I asked. "He's been trying to contact me constantly since yesterday. I don't know what Melissa has told him or how much he knows about what she's really doing." Rachel's expression grew more serious. "That's actually something we need to address immediately. I think Jake may be in more danger than you realize. If Melissa is willing to destroy your life to cover up whatever is really happening in her marriage, she's probably manipulating and possibly threatening Jake as well." She pulled out her phone and showed me Melissa's Instagram account from a different angle, focusing on posts from the past several months that I hadn't paid attention to before. "Look at how she's been portraying their relationship online. Every post shows them as the perfect couple, but if you look carefully at Jake's expressions and body language, you can see signs of strain that don't match her captions." I studied the photos Rachel was showing me, and she was right. In recent posts, Jake's smiles looked forced, his posture seemed tense, and there was something hollow in his eyes that I had attributed to work stress but now recognized as something more serious. "Rachel, what if Jake is being abused? What if Melissa has been using the same manipulation and control tactics on him that she's now using to destroy my reputation?" "That's exactly what I'm thinking. And if that's the case, then your situation might actually be the catalyst that finally gives Jake the evidence and support he needs to escape from whatever hold she has over him." Rachel began gathering her documents and closing folders. "We need to arrange a safe way for you to communicate with Jake without Melissa being able to monitor or control the conversation. I'm going to contact him through my office and arrange a meeting where he can speak freely about what's really been happening in his marriage." The thought that Jake might be as much a victim of Melissa's manipulation as I was reframed everything I thought I understood about the situation. If she was controlling and potentially threatening him, then his inability to stand up to her accusations against me made much more sense. He might be afraid of what she would do to him if he contradicted her story. "In the meantime," Rachel continued, "we're going to implement an aggressive strategy to counteract her social media campaign. I have contacts at several platforms who can help us get her defamatory post reviewed and potentially removed. We're also going to prepare our own statement, backed by evidence, that clearly refutes her accusations and demonstrates her pattern of false claims." I left the coffee shop feeling more hopeful than I had since this nightmare began, but also more aware of the serious legal and personal battle that lay ahead. Rachel's research had revealed that I was dealing with someone far more dangerous and calculating than I had realized, but it had also shown me that there were tools and resources available to fight back effectively. My first stop was to meet with Marcus Torres, the private investigator Rachel had recommended. His office was located in a nondescript building near downtown, the kind of place that suggested discretion and professionalism without drawing unnecessary attention. Marcus himself was in his 50s, with graying hair and the calm demeanor of someone who had dealt with every type of personal crisis imaginable. "Mrs. Torres," he said, gesturing for me to sit in a comfortable chair across from his desk. Rachel filled me in on the basic situation. "What I'd like to do today is get a complete timeline of your interactions with Melissa Hammond over the past year. with particular attention to any behavior that seemed manipulative or controlling. For the next 2 hours, I walked Marcus through every conversation, every coffee meeting, every family gathering where Melissa had been present. He took detailed notes and asked probing questions that helped me recognize patterns I hadn't noticed while I was living through the experiences. Mrs. Torres, based on what you're telling me, I believe Melissa has been planning this campaign against you for several months. The way she positioned herself as your confidant, encouraged you to spend time with Jake, and then documented those interactions suggests a level of premeditation that goes far beyond a jealous spouse acting impulsively. Marcus opened a laptop and showed me what appeared to be a comprehensive analysis of Melissa's social media accounts going back several years. I've been monitoring her online activity since Rachel contacted me last night, and I've identified several concerning patterns. She has a history of targeting other women in your community with subtle campaigns of social isolation and reputation damage. He showed me examples of posts where Melissa had made seemingly innocent comments about other women that actually served to undermine their credibility or social standing. A post about a school fundraiser that mentioned how some parents were more concerned with personal recognition than helping children. A comment on a community event photo that subtly criticized another woman's appearance or behavior. Each individual post seemed harmless, but taken together they revealed a pattern of using social media to control and manipulate social dynamics. The most concerning thing, Marcus continued, is that she appears to have cultivated a network of followers who regularly engage with and amplify her content. When she posts something critical about someone, these followers can be counted on to share and comment in ways that spread her message throughout the community. I thought about the rapid engagement on her post about me, how quickly strangers had begun sharing and commenting with such vitriol. Are you saying she has people who deliberately help her destroy other people's reputations? Not necessarily deliberately, but she's very skilled at presenting herself as a victim in ways that motivate others to defend her. Most of her followers probably believe they're supporting someone who has been wronged, not participating in a harassment campaign. Marcus closed the laptop and handed me a folder containing what appeared to be a detailed investigation plan. Over the next week, I'm going to document every aspect of her current campaign against you, identify her key supporters and potential witnesses, and investigate her claims about your behavior with Jake. I'm also going to reach out to Jennifer Walsh and any other women who may have been targeted by similar campaigns. As I drove home from Marcus's office, my phone rang with Jake's contact information appearing on the screen. I had been avoiding his calls since our text exchange the previous day, unsure of how to handle conversations with him while Melissa's accusations were spreading throughout our community. But Rachel's suggestion that he might be as much a victim as I was made me reconsider my approach. Ashley, Jake's voice sounded strained and exhausted when I answered. Thank God you picked up. I need to talk to you, but not over the phone. Can you meet me somewhere private? There are things about Melissa that you need to know. Things I should have told you months ago. The desperation in his voice convinced me that Rachel's instincts had been correct. Jake, I can meet you, but I need you to understand that everything about this situation has become very complicated. Melissa has made serious accusations against both of us, and I have to protect myself and my family. I know about her Instagram post, he said quietly. Ashley, none of what she's saying is true, and I think you know that. But there's so much more going on that you don't understand. She's not the person any of us thought she was, and I'm afraid of what she might do next if someone doesn't stop her. We arranged to meet at a small diner on the outskirts of town, a place neither of us frequented, and where we were unlikely to be recognized or photographed. I arrived first, choosing a booth in the back corner where we could speak privately without being overheard. Jake arrived 10 minutes later, looking like he had aged years in the past few days. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, there were dark circles under his eyes, and he moved with the careful posture of someone who was under enormous stress. Ashley, he said, sliding into the booth across from me, I need you to know that I never encouraged Melissa's behavior toward you, and I had no idea she was recording our family interactions or planning any kind of campaign against you. When she showed me those photos yesterday and started talking about your supposed feelings for me, I told her she was being ridiculous, and that she needed to stop making up stories. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation, but what I saw was genuine exhaustion and fear. Jake, what did she tell you about our conversation at the park? She said you had confessed to having feelings for me, and that you had been trying to break up our marriage so you could pursue a relationship with me. She claimed you had become angry when she confronted you, and that you had threatened to spread lies about her if she exposed your behavior. The complete reversal of reality was so audacious that it would have been laughable if it weren't so dangerous. Jake, I have a recording of a conversation where Melissa literally begged me to pursue you. She told me she thought we would be perfect together, and that she wanted to step back from your marriage so you and I could explore a relationship. Jake's face went pale as he processed what I was telling him. She what? Ashley, that's insane. Why would she say something like that? I pulled out my phone and found the recording, then handed him my earbuds so he could listen to Melissa's voice, clearly laying out her plan for facilitating a relationship between us. As the recording played, I watched Jake's expression shift from confusion to horror, to a kind of resigned understanding that suggested he was recognizing patterns he had been trying to ignore. "Oh my God," he whispered when the recording ended. "Ashley, this explains so many things that have been happening over the past few months. The way she's been trying to manipulate me into situations with other women, the strange questions she's been asking about our family relationships, the way she's been documenting everything we do." Jake looked around the diner nervously, then leaned forward and lowered his voice. "Ashley, I think Melissa has been planning to leave me for months, but she wants to do it in a way that makes her look like the victim, rather than the person who ended the marriage. If she can create a story where I had an emotional affair with my brother's wife, then she gets to be the wronged party who deserves sympathy and support." The pieces were finally clicking into place. Melissa's encouragement for me to pursue Jake, her careful documentation of our innocent interactions, her strategic positioning of herself as the concerned wife who had discovered a betrayal. She had been engineering a scenario that would allow her to exit her marriage while maintaining her social media image as the perfect wife who had been tragically betrayed. "Jake, why would she want to end your marriage in such a complicated way? Why not just ask for a divorce?" Jake's laugh was bitter and hollow. "Because Melissa's entire identity is built around being the perfect wife in the perfect relationship. Her social media following, her sponsorship deals, her status in this community, all of it depends on people believing that she has figured out how to have the ideal life. If she just asked for a divorce, she would have to admit that her perfect relationship was a lie." He pulled out his own phone and showed me screenshots of messages between him and Melissa over the past several weeks. "Look at these texts. She's been trying to get me to admit to having feelings for other women, asking leading questions about you and other family members, even suggesting that I should explore relationships outside our marriage." The messages were clearly designed to manipulate Jake into saying something that could later be used as evidence of infidelity or emotional affairs. Melissa had been laying groundwork for her victim narrative, while simultaneously trying to gather ammunition to support her accusations. "There's something else," Jake said, glancing around the diner again before continuing. "Melissa has been having an affair for the past 3 months, with someone she met through her social media work. She thinks I don't know, but I've seen the messages and I followed her to meetings that were clearly not business-related." The final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Melissa wasn't just trying to end her marriage while maintaining her victim status. She was trying to clear the way for her new relationship while ensuring that Jake would be blamed for the failure of their marriage. "Jake, we need to document everything you just told me. My lawyer needs to know about her affair, about her attempts to manipulate you into compromising situations, and about her pattern of planning this entire scenario." Jake nodded grimly. "Ashley, there's one more thing you need to know. Melissa has been talking about making more serious accusations if her current story doesn't generate the response she wants. She's mentioned claiming that you've been stalking her or making threats against her. She's prepared to escalate this situation in ways that could destroy your life completely." As we left the diner separately, I felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief because I finally understood the full scope of what I was dealing with, and had an ally in Jake who could provide crucial evidence about Melissa's manipulations. Terror, because I realized that this situation was far from over, and that Melissa was prepared to escalate her attacks to levels I hadn't even imagined. That evening, as I shared Jake's revelations with Michael and Rachel, We began to understand that we weren't just fighting to clear my name from false accusations. We were trying to stop someone who was willing to destroy multiple lives to achieve her goals, someone who had carefully planned and orchestrated a campaign of manipulation that extended far beyond our family. The war for truth was about to intensify in ways none of us were prepared for, but at least now we understood what we were really fighting against. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Rachel called me at 7 a.m., her voice tight with urgency and barely controlled anger. Marcus Torres had discovered something during his overnight investigation that demanded immediate action, and we needed to meet at her office within the hour to discuss our options. I arranged for my mother to watch the children again, giving her a vague explanation about legal meetings that I knew she didn't entirely believe, but was too polite to question. Diana Chen had raised me to handle my own problems, but I could see the worry in her eyes as she watched me rushing around the house, gathering documents and checking my phone constantly for updates. Marcus was already waiting in Rachel's conference room when I arrived, surrounded by printed documents, computer screens, and what appeared to be surveillance equipment. His expression was grim as he gestured for me to sit down across from the array of evidence he had compiled overnight. "Mrs. Torres," he began without preamble, "the situation is much worse than we initially understood. Melissa Hammond isn't just targeting you with false accusations. She's actively working to destroy multiple aspects of your life simultaneously, and she's coordinating with others to amplify the damage." He turned one of his laptop screens toward me, showing what appeared to be a private social media group with over 50 members, all local residents of Millbrook and surrounding communities. "This is a closed group that Melissa created 3 days ago, supposedly for, quote, concerned community members who want to protect local families from what she's calling predatory behavior. She's been sharing more detailed accusations about you in this group, including your full name, photos of your house, and information about where your children go to school." My blood turned cold as I read through the posts Marcus was showing me. Melissa had created an entire narrative about me being a serial seducer of married men, claiming that I had a pattern of targeting vulnerable husbands and breaking up families. She had shared the manipulated photos with detailed captions explaining why each image proved my supposed guilt, and she had encouraged group members to share their own observations about my behavior. "Marcus, this is stalking and harassment. Can't we get this group shut down?" "We're working on that," Rachel interjected, "but there's something more immediate we need to address." "Show her the rest, Marcus." Marcus opened another document that made my stomach drop. "Melissa has filed a formal complaint with Child Protective Services, claiming that your inappropriate relationship with Jake Torres has created an unsafe environment for your children. She's alleged that you've been bringing a man who isn't their father into your home for secret meetings, and that your behavior demonstrates poor judgment that puts minors at risk." The room seemed to spin around me as I processed the implications. "She's trying to get my children taken away from me? The CPS investigation has already been initiated," Rachel said, her voice carefully controlled. "You'll receive official notification later today, and they'll want to interview you, Michael, and potentially the children within the next week. Even though the allegations are false, the investigation process itself can be traumatic and disruptive for your family." Marcus pulled out another set of documents. "There's more. Melissa has also contacted Michael's employer with allegations that you've been using company resources to facilitate your supposed affair. She's claimed that you've met Jake at TechFlow Solutions offices, and that Michael's professional reputation is being damaged by association with your behavior." I felt like I was drowning in an ocean of lies and manipulation, each new revelation pulling me deeper into a nightmare I couldn't escape. How is she even getting all this information? How does she know where Michael works or where my children go to school? "She's been conducting surveillance on your family for months," Marcus explained, showing me time-stamped photos that had clearly been taken without our knowledge. "These images show your daily routines, your children's school pickup times, Michael's work schedule, even your grocery shopping patterns. She's been documenting your life in detail to support whatever narrative she decided to create." Rachel leaned forward, her expression intense. "Ashley, we need to understand that this isn't just about clearing your name anymore. Melissa is trying to systematically destroy your life in ways that could have permanent consequences. The CPS investigation, even if it finds no wrongdoing, will create a record that could affect your family for years. The allegations to Michael's employer could damage his career prospects, The social media harassment could follow your children as they grow up. The scope of the attack was overwhelming, but as I sat there staring at the evidence of Melissa's campaign against my family, I felt something shift inside me. The fear and confusion that had dominated my thoughts for the past week were being replaced by a cold, determined anger. This woman had crossed every line of human decency in her quest to destroy innocent people, and she was now targeting my children and my husband's livelihood. "What do we do?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the chaos of emotions swirling inside me. Marcus and Rachel exchanged glances before Rachel spoke. "We've developed a strategy that will require you to take some significant risks, but it's the only way to stop this escalation and protect your family. We're going to force a public confrontation where Melissa will have to defend her accusations in front of witnesses who can verify the truth." Marcus opened a final folder and spread out what appeared to be event planning documents. "Tomorrow evening is the monthly Millbrook Community Association meeting at the community center. It's a public forum where residents can bring up concerns affecting the neighborhood. Melissa has already signed up to speak during the open comment period, almost certainly to make her accusations against you more official and public. We're going to sign you up to speak immediately after her," Rachel continued. "You'll have the opportunity to play the recording of her encouraging you to pursue Jake, to present evidence of her surveillance and harassment campaign, and to expose her lies in front of the entire community leadership." The idea of standing up in front of dozens of community members to defend myself against humiliating accusations was terrifying, but I could see the strategic value of Rachel's plan. If I could present the truth in a public forum with unimpeachable witnesses, it would be much harder for Melissa to continue spreading lies or to claim that my evidence was fabricated. "What are the risks?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "If this goes wrong," Rachel said honestly, "if Melissa manages to discredit your evidence, or if the community believes her story over yours, the public nature of the confrontation could make everything worse. Your reputation in this community could be permanently destroyed, and the humiliation could affect your family for years." Marcus added, quote, "There's also the possibility that exposing Melissa this publicly could cause her to escalate to even more dangerous behavior. People who are willing to go to these lengths to destroy others sometimes resort to physical threats or violence when their schemes are exposed." I thought about my children sleeping peacefully in their beds that morning, unaware that their mother was being accused of crimes that could tear their family apart. I thought about Michael working hard at his new position, not knowing that his wife's supposed misconduct was being reported to his supervisors. I thought about the lies spreading through our community, poisoning relationships we had spent years building. "I'll do it," I said, feeling a certainty that surprised me with its strength. Melissa chose to make this public, and she chose to involve my children and my husband's career. If she wants a public confrontation, I'll give her one, but it will be with the truth. Rachel nodded approvingly. "Then we have a lot of work to do in the next 36 hours. We need to prepare your presentation, coordinate with Jake to ensure he's there to corroborate your account, and document every aspect of Melissa's harassment campaign so we have comprehensive evidence to present." The rest of that day was spent in intensive preparation. Rachel helped me craft a presentation that was factual and compelling without being defensive or emotional. We organized the evidence chronologically, starting with Melissa's initial encouragement for me to pursue Jake and building through her escalating harassment campaign and false accusations. The recording would be the centerpiece of my defense, but we surrounded it with documentation that showed the broader pattern of her manipulative behavior. Marcus worked on gathering additional evidence, including statements from Jennifer Walsh, the woman whose business Melissa had destroyed 3 years earlier. Jennifer had agreed to provide a written account of her experience, creating a pattern that would be difficult for anyone to dismiss as coincidence. Jake met with us that evening to coordinate his role in the confrontation. He looked exhausted but determined, carrying with him printed copies of the text messages where Melissa had tried to manipulate him into compromising situations. He had also brought financial records showing that Melissa had been hiding money and making preparations to leave their marriage, evidence that supported our theory about her true motivations. "Ashley," Jake said as we wrapped up our planning session, "I need you to know how sorry I am that my wife has put you and your family through this nightmare. I should have recognized what she was capable of months ago and warned you." I studied my brother-in-law's face, seeing genuine remorse and determination. "Jake, We're all victims of her manipulation. What matters now is that we work together to stop her before she destroys anyone else." That evening, Michael and I had one of the most difficult conversations of our marriage. I explained the plan for the community meeting, the risks involved, and the potential consequences if our strategy failed. Michael listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as he understood the stakes we were facing. "Ashley," he said finally, "I'm terrified of what this could mean for our family, but I'm also proud of your courage in fighting back. Melissa has underestimated who she's dealing with. And I think tomorrow night she's going to learn that you're not someone who can be intimidated into silence." We spent the evening preparing our children for the possibility that there might be some adult drama in the coming days that could affect their routines, without giving them details that would frighten them. Connor, at 6 years old, was old enough to understand that there were family problems that Mommy and Daddy were working to solve. Sophie, at 3, was too young to comprehend the situation but seemed to sense the tension in the house. The day of the community meeting dawned gray and overcast, matching my mood as I prepared for what felt like the most important performance of my life. I chose my outfit carefully, wanting to appear professional and credible without seeming like I was trying too hard to impress anyone. Rachel Hedsell coached me on body language and presentation style, emphasizing the importance of appearing calm and confident, even if I felt terrified inside. Marcus had positioned himself strategically at the community center 2 hours before the meeting began, documenting who attended and watching for any signs that Melissa might have orchestrated additional support for her narrative. His reports throughout the afternoon were encouraging, suggesting that attendance was normal for a monthly meeting and that there didn't appear to be an unusual number of Melissa's social media followers present. Jake arrived at the community center separately from us, maintaining the appearance that we weren't coordinating our response to Melissa's accusations. He looked nervous, but determined, carrying a folder of evidence that would support our account of events. We had agreed that he would speak only if directly questioned, allowing me to control the narrative while having his corroboration available if needed. Michael sat in the audience with several of our close friends and neighbors who had come to show support. Their presence was comforting, but I could also see curiosity and uncertainty in the faces of other community members who had clearly heard some version of Melissa's story and were wondering what the truth really was. Melissa arrived fashionably late, making an entrance that seemed calculated to draw maximum attention. She was dressed immaculately, carrying herself with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the advantages in the coming confrontation. She had brought a small entourage of supporters, women I recognized from her social media accounts who had been actively sharing and promoting her posts about me. The meeting began with routine community business, budget discussions and infrastructure updates that felt surreal given the personal drama that was about to unfold. I sat in the front row, trying to appear calm while my heart pounded and my hands trembled slightly with nervous energy. Rachel sat beside me, occasionally squeezing my arm in encouragement and whispering last-minute reminders about the key points I needed to cover. When the open comment period began, Melissa rose gracefully and walked to the podium with the practiced ease of someone comfortable being the center of attention. She had clearly prepared extensively for this moment, pulling out notes and arranging papers with theatrical precision. "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address a serious concern affecting our community," she began, her voice carrying just the right note of vulnerability mixed with determination. "As many of you know, I've been forced to come forward about a situation involving someone who has been targeting married men in our neighborhood, someone who used her position as a trusted family member to pursue an inappropriate relationship with my husband." She launched into a carefully constructed narrative that painted me as a calculating predator who had systematically worked to seduce Jake while pretending to be a supportive sister-in-law. She presented the manipulated photos with emotional commentary about feeling betrayed by someone she had trusted, and she shared selected text messages that had been edited to remove context and create false impressions. "The most painful part of this betrayal," Melissa continued, her voice breaking at precisely the right moment, "is that this person has children of her own, children who are being exposed to this inappropriate behavior. As a community, we have a responsibility to protect all our families from predatory individuals who would use trust and family relationships to pursue their own selfish desires." The performance was masterful, designed to generate maximum sympathy while positioning her as the heroic victim who was bravely speaking out to protect others. I could see several audience members nodding in apparent agreement, their expressions showing the kind of moral outrage that Melissa was clearly hoping to cultivate. When she finished speaking, there was a moment of charged silence before scattered applause from her supporters. Then the meeting moderator called my name, and I walked to the podium on legs that felt unsteady despite my determination to see this through. Thank you for the opportunity to respond to some very serious allegations that have been made against me, I began, my voice stronger than I had expected. What you've just heard is a carefully constructed lie designed to cover up the truth about who really initiated inappropriate conversations about my brother-in-law and me. I pulled out my phone and held it up so everyone in the room could see it. What I'm about to play for you is a recording of a conversation I had with Melissa Hammond just 3 weeks ago, where she explicitly encouraged me to pursue a romantic relationship with her husband while she stepped back from their marriage. The room went completely silent as I pressed play, and Melissa's voice filled the community center with crystal clarity. I think Jake and you would be perfect for each other. I've been watching you interact, and I can see a natural compatibility that Jake and I have never shared. I've been thinking about this for weeks, and I believe everyone would be happier if Jake and you could explore your connection while I step back from the relationship. The recording continued for several minutes, capturing her detailed explanations of how she envisioned facilitating a relationship between Jake and me, her casual discussion of ending her marriage, and her reassurances that she would actively help create opportunities for us to be alone together. Her voice was calm and calculating, leaving no room for interpretation about her intentions or mental state. As the recording played, I watched Melissa's face transform from confident smugness to shock to panic. She had clearly never considered the possibility that I might have documented our conversations, and the irrefutable evidence of her lies was unraveling her carefully constructed narrative in real time. When the recording ended, the silence in the room was deafening. Then voices began rising as audience members started talking among themselves, processing what they had just heard, and trying to reconcile it with the story Melissa had told just minutes earlier. That recording proves exactly what I've been trying to tell you, I continued, my voice growing stronger as I saw the impact of the evidence. Melissa Hammond has been systematically manipulating this situation from the beginning. She encouraged me to pursue her husband, documented our innocent family interactions to create false evidence of an affair, and then launched a harassment campaign designed to destroy my reputation and my family. I pulled out the folder of additional evidence Marcus and Rachel had helped me prepare. What you've heard tonight is just the beginning. Melissa has been stalking my family, taking photographs of our home and our children's schools, filing false reports with Child Protective Services, and spreading lies designed to damage my husband's career and our children's social standing. Melissa suddenly stood up, her composure completely shattered. That recording is fake, she shouted, her voice high and desperate. Anyone can manipulate audio files to say whatever they want. This is all fabricated evidence designed to make me look bad because Ashley knows she's been caught. But her protests only made her appear more guilty and desperate. The recording had been too clear, too detailed, and too consistent with other evidence for anyone to believe it had been fabricated. Several audience members were already pulling out their phones, presumably to check social media posts they had seen and shared, now understanding that they had been participating in a harassment campaign based on lies. Jake stood up from his seat in the audience. "Everything Ashley just told you is true," he said, his voice carrying across the now chaotic room. "My wife has been manipulating this situation for months, and she's been trying to manipulate me as well. I have text messages where she tried to get me to admit to having feelings for other women, and I have evidence that she's been having an affair while accusing Ashley of destroying our marriage." The revelation about Melissa's affair sent another shockwave through the room. Her supporters were beginning to look uncertain, whispering among themselves as they realized that the woman they had been defending might not be the victim she had portrayed herself to be. Melissa looked around the room wildly, seeming to realize that her carefully constructed campaign was collapsing around her. "This is all lies and manipulation," she screamed. "Jake is obviously choosing his family over the truth, and Ashley has convinced him to lie for her. None of you understand what's really been happening." But her increasingly hysterical protests only served to further discredit her story. The calm, vulnerable victim she had portrayed at the beginning of the meeting had been replaced by someone who appeared unhinged and desperate, someone who was clearly capable of the manipulation and deception I had described. The meeting moderator called for order, but the room was buzzing with conversations as people processed what they had witnessed. Several of Melissa's supporters had quietly gathered their things and left, apparently unwilling to continue associating themselves with her story, now that evidence of her lies had been presented. As the official meeting concluded and people began filing out, I was approached by numerous community members who wanted to apologize for believing Melissa's accusations or to express support for my family. The immediate public vindication was overwhelming, but I also realized that this confrontation was only the beginning of the healing process for my family and my reputation. Melissa had disappeared during the chaos following my presentation, apparently unable to face the continued questioning and scrutiny from community members who now understood the truth about her behavior. But as I gathered my things and prepared to leave with Michael and our supporters, I couldn't shake the feeling that this public humiliation might push her to even more desperate and dangerous actions. The war for truth had been won tonight, but the battle to protect my family from Melissa's potential retaliation was just beginning. The days following the community meeting brought a mixture of relief and apprehension as the truth about Melissa's campaign finally emerged into the light. Word spread quickly through Millbrook about what had transpired at the community center, and the recording of Melissa encouraging me to pursue Jake became the definitive evidence that completely dismantled her narrative of victimhood. Within 48 hours, Melissa's social media accounts had been flooded with comments from community members demanding explanations and apologies. Her Instagram following, which she had worked so hard to cultivate, began abandoning her in droves as people realized they had been manipulated into participating in a harassment campaign against an innocent family. The local businesses that had provided her with sponsorship deals quietly distanced themselves from her, unwilling to associate their brands with someone who had been exposed as a manipulative liar. Rachel worked swiftly to address the various false reports Melissa had filed against our family. The Child Protective Services investigation was quickly closed after I presented them with the recording and evidence of Melissa's harassment campaign. The investigator assigned to our case actually apologized for the stress the false allegations had caused, explaining that they were required to investigate all reports, but that it had become immediately clear that the accusations were malicious and unfounded. Michael's employer at TechFlow Solutions was equally understanding once they learned the truth about the situation. His supervisor called him personally to express support and to assure him that the false allegations would have no impact on his career prospects. The company's human resources department even offered to provide a letter of support if we decided to pursue legal action against Melissa for her defamatory campaign. Marcus Torres continued his investigation into Melissa's background and discovered even more disturbing patterns than we had initially realized. The boutique fitness studio owner, Jennifer Walsh, was just one of several women Melissa had targeted over the years with similar campaigns of social destruction. Marcus found evidence of at least 4 other instances where Melissa had orchestrated harassment campaigns against women she perceived as threats or competitors, using social media manipulation and false accusations to damage their reputations and social standing. Most shocking was Marcus's discovery that Melissa's affair, which Jake had suspected, was actually with a married man whose wife had been one of her previous targets. 3 years earlier, Melissa had systematically destroyed the reputation of a woman named Catherine Mills, claiming that Catherine had been inappropriate with her husband, David Mills. The harassment campaign had been so effective that Catherine had moved to another state to escape the ongoing persecution. David Mills had divorced Catherine within months, and he had been secretly involved with Melissa ever since. The pattern was clear and horrifying. Melissa would identify married couples where she found the husband attractive or useful to her goals. She would launch a campaign to destroy the wife's reputation using false accusations of infidelity or inappropriate behavior. Once the marriage was damaged beyond repair, she would position herself as a supportive friend to the devastated husband, eventually transitioning into a romantic relationship while maintaining her public image as someone who helped people through difficult times. Jake was devastated when he learned the full scope of his wife's manipulations, but he was also relieved to finally understand the bizarre behavior he had been witnessing for months. The text messages where Melissa had tried to get him to admit to having feelings for other women were part of her strategy to gather evidence she could use to justify leaving him for David Mills. She had been planning to portray Jake as emotionally unfaithful, making herself the victim of yet another failed marriage caused by a cheating spouse. "Ashley," Jake said during one of our family meetings with Rachel, "I can't believe I was married to someone capable of destroying so many lives for her own selfish purposes. When I think about what she almost did to you and Michael and the kids, I feel sick." The divorce proceedings between Jake and Melissa moved quickly once the truth about her behavior became public. Jake had documented evidence of her affair, her financial deceptions, and her attempts to manipulate him into compromising situations. Melissa's attorney advised her to agree to a swift settlement rather than risk further public exposure of her actions during a lengthy court battle. During the divorce proceedings, additional evidence emerged about the extent of Melissa's deceptive behavior. Financial records showed that she had been siphoning money from their joint accounts for months, preparing to fund her new life with David Mills. She had also been using their shared credit cards to finance her social media lifestyle while hiding the debt from Jake, leaving him responsible for thousands of dollars in charges he had never authorized. Most disturbing were the communications Marcus uncovered between Melissa and David Mills, where they had discussed their strategy for destroying my reputation as a trial run for future campaigns against other women they perceived as obstacles. The calculated nature of their planning was chilling, revealing that my family had been chosen as victims in what amounted to a practice exercise for a pattern of behavior they intended to continue. Rachel decided to pursue a comprehensive legal strategy that would not only clear my name definitively, but also establish legal precedents that might protect future victims of similar harassment campaigns. We filed defamation lawsuits against both Melissa and David Mills, seeking both monetary damages and formal retractions of all false statements they had made about me and my family. The legal proceedings moved more quickly than Rachel had initially expected, largely because the evidence against Melissa was so overwhelming that her attorneys had little choice but to recommend settlement negotiations. The recording of her encouraging me to pursue Jake was irrefutable proof that her accusations were fabricated, and the additional evidence of her surveillance and harassment campaign demonstrated clear malicious intent. During one particularly productive settlement meeting, Melissa's attorney presented a proposal that included formal written apologies to be posted on all her social media accounts, financial compensation for the damages her lies had caused to my reputation and family, and a binding agreement that she would cease all contact with members of our family and refrain from making any further statements about us in any forum. Mrs. Torres, Melissa's attorney, said during the negotiation session, "My client acknowledges that her behavior was inappropriate and caused significant distress to your family. She's prepared to make substantial financial restitution and to publicly retract all statements she made about you." I looked across the conference table at Melissa, who appeared to have aged years in the weeks since the community meeting. Her carefully maintained appearance had given way to a haggard look that suggested she was finally facing the consequences of her actions. For a moment I felt a flash of something that might have been pity, but then I remembered the fear in my children's eyes when strangers had started pointing and whispering about their family, and my resolve hardened. "The financial compensation is important," I replied, "but what matters most to me is ensuring that Melissa can never do this to another family. The settlement needs to include provisions that will make her accountable for any future harassment campaigns she might launch against other women." Rachel had prepared comprehensive terms that went beyond typical defamation settlements. In addition to the public apologies and financial restitution, Melissa would be required to undergo psychological counseling to address the underlying issues that drove her manipulative behavior. She would also be subject to ongoing monitoring of her social media activities, with severe financial penalties if she was found to be engaging in harassment or defamation of other individuals. The settlement was finalized 6 weeks after the community meeting, bringing legal closure to the nightmare that had consumed our lives for months. Melissa's public apologies were posted across all her social media platforms, reaching the thousands of people who had been exposed to her lies about me. The posts clearly stated that her accusations had been false, that I had never behaved inappropriately with Jake, and that her claims of evidence had been fabricated or manipulated. But the most meaningful aspect of the resolution was watching my family begin to heal from the trauma we had endured. Connor returned to school with his head held high. no longer worried about whispers and pointed fingers from other parents. Sophie, who had been too young to understand the specifics of what was happening, sensed the relief in our household and returned to her normal cheerful demeanor. Michael's career recovered quickly from the brief cloud that had hung over it during Melissa's campaign. His colleagues at TechFlow Solutions rallied around him with support and encouragement, and his supervisor made it clear that the false allegations had only strengthened their respect for how he had handled the crisis. The promotion he had received just before this nightmare began led to additional opportunities and recognition within the company. Jake struggled more with the emotional aftermath of discovering the true nature of the woman he had been married to. The realization that every aspect of their relationship had been based on manipulation and deception required extensive therapy to process. But gradually, with the support of our family and professional counseling, he began to rebuild his sense of self-worth and trust in his own judgment. Patricia Torres, Michael and Jake's mother, was initially devastated by the revelations about Melissa's behavior. She had genuinely cared for Melissa and had been completely deceived by her performance as the perfect daughter-in-law. But Patricia's innate wisdom and strong family loyalty helped her focus on healing rather than dwelling on the betrayal. "Mija," she told me during one of our Sunday dinners, using the affectionate Spanish term she had started calling me, "some people come into our lives to teach us lessons about trust and forgiveness. Melissa taught us that family bonds are stronger than lies, and that the truth will always find a way to emerge." The most unexpected outcome of the entire ordeal was how much stronger my marriage to Michael became through the process of fighting for our family's reputation and future. The crisis had tested every aspect of our relationship, forcing us to communicate more honestly and support each other through genuine fear and uncertainty. We had faced the possibility of losing everything we had built together, and surviving that threat had deepened our appreciation for what we had. My relationship with Jake also evolved in positive ways once the cloud of false accusations was finally lifted. We were able to interact naturally as family members again, without the artificial tension that Melissa's manipulations had created. Jake expressed gratitude for how I had fought to expose the truth, rather than simply trying to distance myself from the situation, and our mutual respect grew stronger through the shared experience of being targeted by someone we had both trusted. The broader community response was overwhelmingly supportive once the truth emerged. Many people who had initially been swayed by Melissa's convincing performance made personal apologies for their hasty judgments. Others shared their own stories of being manipulated by people who use social media and community connections to spread false narratives, helping us understand that our experience was part of a larger pattern of behavior that was becoming increasingly common in our connected world. Several months after the settlement was finalized, I received a phone call that brought the entire experience full circle. It was from Catherine Mills, the woman whose marriage Melissa had destroyed 3 years earlier as part of her strategy to steal David Mills. Catherine had learned about our case through the media coverage and wanted to thank me for exposing the truth about Melissa's behavior. "Ashley," Catherine said, her voice filled with emotion, "you'll never know what it means to me that someone finally stood up to her and proved what she's really capable of. I lost my marriage, my home, and my standing in my community because of her lies, and I never thought anyone would believe the truth about what she did." Catherine's call reminded me that our fight hadn't just been about protecting my own family. By exposing Melissa's pattern of manipulation and holding her accountable for her actions, we had potentially prevented future victims from suffering the same devastating experiences that Catherine had endured. Marcus Torres continued to investigate Melissa's activities even after our case was resolved, working with other women who had been targeted by similar campaigns. His work led to the formation of a support network for victims of social media harassment and defamation, providing resources and legal assistance for people who found themselves facing false accusations and reputational attacks. As the 1-year anniversary of Melissa's first threatening text message approached, I found myself reflecting on how profoundly the experience had changed my understanding of trust, family loyalty, and personal resilience. I had learned that people could be far more deceptive and manipulative than I had ever imagined, but I had also discovered reserves of strength and determination within myself that I hadn't known existed. The guest room in our house, which had once felt contaminated by Melissa's presence during family gatherings, was converted into a home office where I began working on a book about surviving false accusations and social media harassment. The project grew out of conversations with other women who had faced similar attacks, and it became a way to channel the pain of our experience into something that might help future victims. Michael and I made the decision to have another child, feeling that our family had emerged from the crisis stronger and more united than ever. When our son Lucas was born 18 months after the nightmare began, it felt like a symbol of renewal and hope for our family's future. Connor and Sophie embraced their roles as big siblings with enthusiasm, and even Jake became a devoted uncle who clearly treasured his opportunity to be part of a healthy, loving family dynamic. The final piece of closure came when Melissa and David Mills left Millbrook entirely, relocating to another state where their reputations hadn't been destroyed by the exposure of their manipulative behavior. While part of me wished they could have faced more serious consequences for the damage they had caused to multiple families, I was relieved to know that they were no longer in our community where they could target new victims. Looking back on the entire experience, I realized that Melissa's threatening message that October evening had actually been a gift in disguise. Her escalation to open accusations had forced the truth into the light and exposed her manipulative behavior before she could completely destroy my family's life. If she had been more patient and strategic, she might have succeeded in her campaign to drive Michael and me apart, while positioning herself as the concerned family member who had tried to warn us about problems in our marriage. The recording I had made of our coffee shop conversation remained the turning point that saved my family and exposed her lies. That decision to document her disturbing suggestions had seemed like a small precaution at the time, but it had proven to be the evidence that unraveled her entire web of deception. As I tucked Connor and Sophie into bed one evening, Connor asked me about the adult drama that had affected our family months earlier. He was old enough now to understand that there had been someone who had told lies about our family, and he wanted to know if it could happen again. Sometimes, I told him, people make bad choices that hurt other people, but when that happens, the most important thing is to tell the truth and stick together as a family. Truth is always stronger than lies, even when it takes time for people to see it. Sophie, now 4 years old, nodded seriously from her bed. "And we have each other," she added with the simple wisdom of a child. "That's right, sweetheart," I agreed, kissing both my children goodnight. "We have each other, and that's the most important thing of all." Standing in the doorway of their room, watching my children sleep peacefully in the home we had fought so hard to protect, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the strength our family had discovered through adversity. The woman who had tried to destroy us with her lies and manipulation had ultimately made us stronger, more united, and more appreciative of the authentic love and trust we shared. The nightmare was finally over, and our real life could begin again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.